So these are the some of the legal definitions of foreign trade zones, and in all of these various bullet points, there is very important information that describes what a zone is or what a zone can be, and you need to be aware of them. First one, the secure area located in or near a port of entry. That describes where zones can be created. So a secure area means that they are secure both for persons coming into the facility as well as the merchandise coming into or out of a facility. Both are somewhat controlled by customs, and we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. Located in or near a port of entry. There are over 300 U.S. Customs ports of entry in the United States. Most of them are on the border, either the Mexican-Canadian border or on the east-west coast and the Gulf of Mexico. So they're either deep water ports or border crossings. But there are a substantial number as well that are inland ports. Foreign Trade Zone 147 is located in and around or in and near the U.S. Customs Port of Entry, Harrisburg. It's important to remember that the port of entry is not just a simple point on the map. So it's not where customs office is. It's not at the airport. It's a geographical region that was defined by customs when the port was established. So the Harrisburg port includes all of Dauphin County, most of Cumberland County, the northern part of York County. So those are the port boundaries. So for foreign trade zone purposes, locating in or near a port of entry means 60 miles or 90 driving minutes from the outermost limits of the customs port of entry. So 60 miles or 90 driving minutes from any of those places I just previously described. So it's not necessarily a point. So given that description, you can understand how large Foreign Trade Zone 147 is geographically. And if we have time, we'll talk about how large it is in other mechanisms. Now, the most important bullet point on here, as far as all of you are concerned, is the second one, that merchandise held in a foreign trade zone is considered to be outside the U.S. Customs territory or outside of the U.S. or outside of U.S. commerce. So that is important to remember, and you'll understand when we get a little bit further in, when we talk about what the benefits of zones are, why that is so important. In a foreign trade zone, I'm not going to read the whole list there, but if you can perform an activity in the commerce of the United States within the U.S. Customs territory, not in a foreign trade zone, you can probably do that in a foreign trade zone as well. There are only a very few absolute prohibitions. One is no retail trade can be conducted within a foreign trade zone. And there are provisions to make exceptions for places like employee stores that are within a facility, but no retail trade. So we're not going to find Kohl's or Target or Walmart stores as foreign trade zones. Their distribution centers may be, but their stores are not going to be. Some of the other prohibitions are whatever happens in a foreign trade zone must be in accordance with U.S. trade policy. The zone program cannot be used to circumvent U.S. trade policy. That's also an important one in today's world. And then there are some of the other things that place certain restrictions. Stainless steel, right? Nowadays just steel in general, or aluminum. Some of those types of things. Sugar. They have certain prohibitions on the uses that need to be addressed on an individual basis. But in general, if you're doing anything that's in that list there, you can do it within a foreign trade zone. So just a brief history, it was introduced back in 1894. So this is an old program. It was successfully, thank you, Aaron, reintroduced in 1934 as, well, this part's controversial, part of the New Deal. Some people say it's part of the New Deal. Some people say it was in response to the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. But whichever side of the coin you come down on, it's been in existence since 1934. The House bill was to provide for the establishment, operation, maintenance of foreign trade zones in ports of entry of the United States to expedite and encourage foreign commerce. Within that statement as well, that last part, to expedite and encourage foreign commerce, is important also because the foreign trade zone program is a trade program. It's not a customs program such as duty drawback or bonded warehouse. It is governed by U.S. trade policy and not simply by the whims of customs and border protection. Couple definitions that are going to be important as we move forward. Grantee is a public or private entity. It could be port authorities, city or county economic development corporations. It can be the Chamber of Commerce. In effect, Foreign Trade Zone 147 here in South Central Pennsylvania, the grantee is the Foreign Trade Zone Corporation of South Central Pennsylvania, which is a, for lack of a better term, a shell corporation that is managed by the Berks Chamber Alliance. The grantee serves as the public representative of the zone program because there's a public interest involved in the zone program. The grantee may operate the zone or contract out. And here in Foreign Trade Zone 147, we've elected to contract out all of the operations of the foreign trade zone. Very few zone grantees act as their own or operate their own zones. Some of the deep water ports do, simply because there are warehouses that complement the offloading and loading of ships that are under the control of those port authorities. But here, if a foreign trade zone is established at your facility, we, the grantee, contract out with you, the company using the company operating the zone, and give most of those responsibilities then to you. All applications for creating a zone or modifying a zone or for production authority must come through the grantee. It's fine if a consultant or a company writes the applications, but they can't be submitted to Washington. They have to be brought through the FTZ 147 board of directors so that that board can determine whether it's an appropriate use within our zone here. The operator is the company that runs the zone, basically, that runs each zone site here in 147. And that could be a private corporation, or as I said, it can be the grantee. Operations are warehousing, storage, transportation, distribution, and manufacturing. So those operators, those are the companies that provide the day-to-day oversight of the zone. What happens in the zone. They hire the forklift drivers. They own or lease the warehouse space. They have they do the record keeping, marketing of their own zone, that kind of thing. So a lot of what a grantee would be allowed to do by law is transferred to the operator here in 147. And then the user is the company that owns the merchandise. So that you can have, in circumstances of a third-party logistics warehouse, the warehouse operator being the operator and the user being the company who is storing merchandise within that warehouse, within that zone. Or if it's a single-use facility, the operator and the user are typically the same organization. So whomever owns or leases the building also hires the forklift drivers and also owns the merchandise. The users, the biggest users in the zones right now are the petroleum refining industry, because the zone, the size yeah, I guess the size of the zones is calculated by the U.S. Foreign Trade Zones Board as using value. So the value of the merchandise. Well, the petroleum industry has the highest value of merchandise, but computer electronics, shipbuilding, excuse me, what's that? Here in 147, we have shoes with Clark Shoes. We have baseball caps by New Era Cap. We have iPhones, Macs, iPads by DH or DP Partners, who operates a zone for Apple. We have Newell Products, which is housewares, Tupperware, those kind of things. There's a second Apple facility. There is a VF outdoor for backpacks and coats, winter coats, those types of things. And there's a third party logistics warehouse operated by Stolfus Export Logistics as well. I probably missed one or two of them there. We're getting larger and larger. Oh, and our most recent company to activate and start using the zone is Harley Davidson here in York, Pennsylvania, and they expect to be increasing the size of their operations over the coming years as well. Administrator, that's what I am. That's what Campbell Trade Group does. We are subcontracted by the grantee to handle the day-to-day operations of the foreign trade zone project, not individual sites, but the zone project. So your initial communication and most of the ongoing communication is going to come through Campbell Trade Group, and then I'll interact with Aaron and the rest of the board on your behalf. Interact with the Foreign Trade Zones Board in Washington on your behalf. Those kind of things. So it saves the grantee from spending the funds to become a zone expert, because it can take a lot of time and a lot of effort to do that, and ends up to be less expensive to subcontract that out to somebody who's already taking care of that part of it. And let's not leave out the customs brokers. Very, very, very rarely do I recommend that a company cease using their customs broker. Customs broker generally know what's happening in a zone, how the paperwork is handled, all of those different kind of things. So I very, very rarely will recommend not using your customs broker, even though you always have the right. An importer always has the right to transact their business on their own behalf. So I'm going to jump past a lot of things here, and let's go to this organizational chart. So at the bottom, we've got the users who own the merchandise, then the zone operator who handles the day-to-day activity within the zone, then U.S. Customs and Border Protection sits in between and off to the side of the zone operator and the grantee. And it'll be evident as we go forward what their role is. We talked about the grantee, and then at the top of the pyramid for the program is the U.S. Foreign Trade Zones Board in Washington, D.C., which is an independent agency within the U.S. Department of Commerce. There is a Foreign Trade Zone Board, which is made up of the Secretary of Commerce and the Secretary of Treasury. So it's not a very large board. The Foreign Trade Zone Board, what do? Well, they issue grants of authority to establish, expand, operate, and maintain foreign trade zones. So as the grantee, we will submit applications to the Foreign Trade Zones Board staff, who will then review the applications and make a recommendation to the board, to the Secretary of Commerce and the Secretary of Treasury, as to whether or not that property should be included as a foreign trade zone. As a government agency, they establish the rules and the regulations to create and operate zones. And one of the only times that there's direct interaction from an operator to the Foreign Trade Zone Board is at the year's end, when there are statistics that need to be reported to the Foreign Trade Zone Board staff, because the Foreign Trade Zone Board staff is required by law to compile a report to Congress on the operations on the state of the program. Customs then, Customs and Border Protection, I'll just use Customs from now. They monitor the flow of merchandise. It's what Customs always does. They monitor the flow of merchandise into and out of the United States. So they monitor the flow of merchandise into and out of a foreign trade zone, and they ensure that all of the revenue is connected properly, which at the end of the day is what the government is most concerned about. Then the local Customs Port Director will oversee the zone on behalf of the U.S. Foreign Trade Zone Board, since they don't have representatives that can go around the country. They make individual port policy. They'll comment on applications to the Foreign Trade Zone Board. They'll establish and approve various zone procedures. It's the part of the government that the operator deals with on a daily basis or a weekly basis, but that's where the most of your dealing ends up to be, is with the local Customs Port Director or their Foreign Trade Zone officer. So locally in Harrisburg, the Port Director is a gentleman by the name of Rory Bates, and the zone specialist, Foreign Trade Zone specialist there, is Officer Merlot. So those are, if you get involved in the zone program, those are names you'll learn and people you'll get to know. Some of the other government agencies also have a role to play in the zone program. Most of them are because they have a slightly different set of regulations that pertain to zones, but it's minimal. The biggest or the agency with the most interaction in zones is the Food and Drug Administration, not only because of foods and drugs, but they also regulate lasers. So a CD player has a laser. It's unbelievable the number of things that the Food and Drug Administration will regulate. But that's where the agency where the most interaction, other than Customs and Border Protection. Being within a foreign trade zone doesn't exempt you from other federal laws. It is only the specific customs laws and regulations that are either different or restricted or eliminated. But there's things like labor laws and then locally zoning laws, those types of things are all still in effect. It's only those certain customs regulations that get affected. That's what I just said. So we went through this list before, but just quickly again, this is a list of the things that can be done within a foreign trade zone. What can't be done, talked a little bit about this too, the import of goods prohibited by law, retail trade, and the two that are important now, more so now than at other times, is the use of the program to circumvent countervailing or anti-dumping duties. That doesn't mean you can't have products that are subject to countervailing or anti-dumping duties in the zone. It just means that you're not going to eliminate the duties or change the duty rate of product that comes into the United States for sale from a foreign trade zone. And then most recently, the use of the program to contradict established U.S. trade policy. All of the penalty duties or the I forget what all they're called now off the top of my head, but all of the new duties that were just imposed this spring are established U.S. trade policy. So the program can't get you around those duties. So anytime the product comes into a foreign trade zone and then comes into the commerce of the United States or into the customs territory, those duties are going to be paid. No way around that with the current circumstances. Here is the extent of the zone project as it stands now. I think Erin missed Chester when she went through the list, but we'll cut her a break on that with as many counties as are included there. All right, this is probably what you really came to talk about. So let's get right to this now. What's the advantage to a company for using the foreign trade zone program? Well, there are three main cash flow benefits. Most circumstances, a company will need to be able to cover their costs and their associated risks with the savings that they get from one of these three benefits. There are a couple other benefits that are not necessarily cash flow benefits, but we'll touch briefly on those. Some of those are the sole reason why a few companies will use the foreign trade zone program, but generally it's at least one of these. Okay. Manufacturing and manipulation are different, considered different in foreign trade zones than sometimes in general parlance. While manipulation is most often thought of packing and unpacking, cleaning, sorting, grading, those kind of things. That's true in a foreign trade zone as well. Manufacturing in a foreign trade zone is anything that changes the tariff classification of the merchandise. So that can be kitting, can change the tariff classification, so that can be considered manufacturing. So if you take a mechanical pencil and a pen and bring them both in bulk separately, the mechanical pencil has a HTS number, harmonized tariff number, and a specific duty rate. The pen has a different harmonized tariff number and a specific duty rate. And if you put them together and sell them as a pen and pencil set, it has a third harmonized tariff schedule number and duty rate. So by putting a pen and a pencil in a box and selling it or shipping it out to a customer is considered manufacturing in the zone, and you would need to have specific approval from the Foreign Trade Zone Board for that to ensure that the benefits associated with that manufacturing are consistent with U.S. trade policy. So keep in your mind, kitting is also manufacturing, and there's an extra step or two. The next thing we need to be aware of is zone status. Then this is something that only exists in foreign trade zone world. There is domestic status, which is obviously anything that's made or grown in the United States. But it is also, as far as customs is concerned, it is also anything that was previously imported and duty paid. That's considered to be domestic merchandise in the eyes of customs. I'm going to flip this around now. The privileged foreign status is merchandise that is assigned its classification, duty rate, and value when it comes into the foreign trade zone, and it stays that way. It can't be changed. It stays that way until the product comes out of the foreign trade zone. So if you bring a circuit breaker into the foreign trade zone, it's going to stay a circuit breaker until it comes out of the foreign trade zone, no matter what else happens to it while it's in the zone. Non-privileged foreign then is the exact opposite. It is all of the HTS, the value, the duty rate on non-privileged foreign merchandise is established at the time that it leaves the foreign trade zone. And that's gonna be important in a couple of the benefits. And then the last is zone restricted. Zone restricted means all you can do with it is export it or destroy it. And if the only way to change product zone status from zone restricted is to have specific approval from the U.S. Foreign Trade Zone Board. And that's not easy to do. It doesn't get granted very often, maybe once, twice a year at the very, very most. So there are very few times where a company will declare zone restricted status of their merchandise. All right, let's jump into them. Duty deferral. Duty deferral is simply time value of money. So in a normal importing situation, product comes into the port of arrival. Its customs entry is filed, the duties and taxes are paid, and it's released for consumption in the United States. It's gone. Customs has a very difficult time of finding that merchandise and bringing it back if something were wrong and they needed to. So it's the duty, and that's, you know, in normal circumstances, duties are paid when it arrives and it goes. In a foreign trade zone, the duties, let me step back. In a foreign trade zone, most of the activity that occurs at the time of arrival, when the merchandise arrives at the port, first port of arrival, is shifted until the product leaves the foreign trade zone. So the duties and taxes are paid when the product leaves the foreign trade zone, not when it arrives at the first port of arrival. So let's assume that a company is importing circuit breakers from Italy, and those circuit breakers have a duty rate of 5%. But they're in a normal circumstance, they would pay that 5% as soon as they arrived in the United States. At any port of arrival, the zone program, it doesn't matter where your product arrives in the United States. It can arrive on the West Coast, East Coast, the Gulf Coast, the Canadian border. It doesn't make any difference. You're not restricted to one port. So these breakers arrive from Italy. Without a zone, the company pays 5% of the value of that merchandise when it arrives, and the breakers go. In a foreign trade zone, they admit the product into the foreign trade zone program and don't pay the duty until those circuit breakers are sold and removed from the foreign trade zone. Merchandise held in the foreign trade zone can stay there forever as long as you have the proper documentation for it and the site remains a foreign trade zone. Whereas in a bonded warehouse, there's a 5-year limit with extensions, of course, but there is a 5-year limit. There is no limit to the amount of time that merchandise can stay in a foreign trade zone. So a simple calculation, calculation, this would be, you know, the volume of imports divided by the number of inventory turns times the duty rate of the product equals the borrowing cost, which then would be, or times the borrowing cost, which would equal the savings. So if it were $50 million worth of product came through the zone twice, through the zone a year, the inventory turned twice, the duty rate was 5%, and the cost of borrowing was 4%. Without compounding, the duty rate would be, savings would be $50,000 of duty deferral for that year. Okay. Understandably, this is the use of the zone program that is most of the time the least beneficial to the company. First of all, you don't want your product sitting in the warehouse very, very long. So you want those inventories to turn over quickly. And we're, you know, in a period where the interest rates are low. I'm old enough to have needed to be a renter while the while the interest rates were 18 to 21%. So 4% to me is low. Okay. Duty elimination. This can come in a couple ways, and this is used quite frequently. Remember, merchandise in a foreign trade zone moves directly from the port of arrival to a foreign trade zone, and the government doesn't have the authority to tax it because it's not within the U.S. Customs territory or within the U.S. Commerce. So if you subsequently export that merchandise from the foreign trade zone, it never entered the commerce of the United States, so the government never had the authority to tax it, so you never pay the duties that would have been paid on that merchandise if it were imported in a normal situation. So using those same say breaker examples, breakers from Italy come to the foreign trade zone with a duty rate of 5%. They are subsequently exported from the foreign trade zone, either in the boxes that they arrived in or after they've been repackaged, or in some circumstances after they've been installed into some other piece of equipment. There's no duty paid on those breakers if they're exported from the foreign trade zone. If they're exported directly out of the United States from a foreign trade zone, there's no duty ever paid on those breakers. So you can see how this can be a very big benefit to someone who is importing and either transshipping to another country, or in some cases manufacturing into a different product and then exporting. Those duties are never paid on that merchandise. There are some other things that come into play here too, such as if your company has product that has a high rate of fault, quality assurance fault. So you end up scrapping parts. So you do quality assurance when the product arrives and the product's defective. You never pay the duties on that merchandise because it never enters the commerce of the United States. You either send it back or you can destroy it in the foreign trade zone. But that's a way of eliminating the duties as well. And it doesn't have to be that the product arrived out of spec. It could be that your forklift driver ran the tines through a pallet or two, or the boxes fell over and everything broke. It doesn't matter. The product is not going to be, it's not usable, so it's not coming into the commerce of the United States, so there's no duty to be paid on those. So, those are two of the biggest uses of duty elimination. So this calculation is pretty easy. If you had $50 million worth of merchandise that had a 5% duty rate, the duty liability would be $2.5 million. Well, you don't pay any of that because it never entered the commerce of the United States. So the immediate savings is $2.5 million. And it's not like duty drawback where you have to save the paperwork and make a separate application to customs in order to draw back up to 99% of the duties. You never paid it, so you don't have to ask for it back. You've had the use of that money the entire time. Then here's the benefit that is used most often in manufacturing. This is the manufacturer's darling. It's duty reduction through tariff relief, inverted tariff relief. There are many times where the component parts are dutiable at a higher level than the finished product, which would tend to encourage manufacture of the finished product and then importing the finished product rather than bringing those parts to the United States and doing the manufacturing here. A friend of mine calls that an irrational tariff treatment, and that's why it's irrational to encourage manufacturing offshore. But if you look at the harmonized tariff schedule of the US, there are many, many times where the component parts are dutiable at a higher level than the finished product. So in a zone, you get to, with manufacturing approval, you select whether you want to pay the duty on the duty rate of the individual product or the duty rate of the finished product. It's up to you. And I'll explain why you would want to do both in some circumstances. Okay, so those same breakers are brought into the foreign trade zone. They have a duty rate of 5%. They're brought into the warehouse. Then subsequently, they are manufactured into treadmills. They're put into treadmills. This actually was an actual use in foreign trade zone 147. The treadmills were coming in and they needed to replace the breakers with US specifications rather than Italian specifications. So this actually was a real use. But so the breakers are then put into the treadmills, and the duty rate of the treadmill is 2%. So the breakers end up essentially being dutiable at 2%. When they're brought out of the foreign trade zone, and that's if they're put into non-privileged foreign status. Remember, that means that their classification and value and duty is determined at the time that it leaves the foreign trade zone, and the 2% is assessed on the value of the foreign components only. Not on any domestic materials, not on any value-added labor, any of those types of things, only on the value of the foreign components. Anytime that there is a change in duty that occurs in the foreign trade zone, like this example, the Foreign Trade Zone Board must approve that special authority through what they call production authority. So it's a separate application in the process. So it's an extra step. And the calculation here would be 5% of importing your duty liability would be $2.5 million, but because you're allowed to select the 2% of the value of the foreign components in the treadmills instead of the 5% of the value of the breakers on importation, your savings ends up to be, you end up paying the 2% on the value. So your savings ends up to be $1.5 million by using the duty reduction. There are many circumstances where the imported component has a duty rate and the finished product would be duty free. And in those circumstances, the product, you eliminate all the duty on those products that were imported, even though they had a duty rate when they first came in. So let's assume that although the breakers have a duty rate of 5% and the finished treadmill had a duty rate of 2%, that the belt that you walk on a treadmill had a duty rate of 1%, and you imported those as well. So, well, you wouldn't want to pay 2% on something that you could import as 1%. So that's where that flexibility comes into play, where you can choose the duty rate that you would like to use. So when your customs entry is made for the product coming out of the foreign trade zone into the commerce of the United States, you have two line items on there. You have your treadmill, which includes the breakers. So you're paying 2.5% on the value of the breakers in that treadmill. And then the separate line item then is for the belt. And so you pay the 1% on the value of the belt. So you're not considering the belt as part of the treadmill in that circumstance. So that's how that's used to when some component parts have a higher duty rate than the finished product, and some component parts have a lower duty rate than the component products. Some of the other benefits, the zone program eliminates a lot of the quota and visa issues. Like I said, there are no time constraints on storage. Shorter transit time. There's a special program within the foreign trade zone program called direct delivery that allows merchandise to go directly from the port of arrival to the foreign trade zone and bypass a lot of the inspection activity that happens at the port because you get in essence, you get that product pre-cleared, so it moves directly from the port to your foreign trade zone. And then weekly entries that allows a product to be reported to customs on a weekly basis instead of a shipment by shipment basis. Weekly exports, the same thing. It's on a weekly basis rather than a shipment by shipment if you're exporting quite a lot. Let's get that improved inventory control because every company believes that they have good inventory control and they never lose any product or it's at a very low rate. So no one ever believes me when I say that they get a benefit by improved inventory control. So we'll just skip that one right now. Duty deferral on production equipment. This is something we're not going to have time to talk about, but essentially you can bring foreign equipment in that you're going to ultimately use to produce a product, bring it into the foreign trade zone, set it up, test it, and not pay the duties on the equipment until you put it into production. So if there's a long setup time, that could be beneficial as well. A little bit more on weekly entry, because this is where the big box distribution companies will save all of their money. I cut some of the slides out to make sure, so let me see what I got. Okay. Weekly entry is exactly what it says. You file one entry to customs a week instead of an entry every time that a shipment arrives. So you save on some broker fees because you're filing less documents. And there's also merchandise processing fee savings, which is the big one in this circumstance. So merchandise processing fee is required on imports from almost everywhere except Canada and Mexico. And the rate is 0.3464% of the value. And it caps right now at $634.62 per entry. I say right now because both the percentage and the cap can change every year. Customs makes that determination in every new budget year. The merchandise processing fee is meant to cover the costs of customs operations. That's supposedly what it's for. So the more merchandise and the more entries that are filed, the more the importer pays because there's more activity needed by customs. Well, if you're receiving merchandise, a shipment every day, let me just go to the next step. It's easier to explain that way. So let's let another fictitious situation. So you've got a company that, without using a foreign trade zone, they bring in a shipment every weekday of the year, every workday of the year. And for the sake of this discussion, let's just say it meets that cap. So the value of the shipment is high enough, somewhere around $230,000, $240,000, that it meets the $634.62 cap. So you would file a customs entry for each one of those shipments. So ultimately, in the course of a year, you'd pay $165,000 to customs just to file paperwork. Is basically all that you're doing. You're getting no benefit out of it. It's meant to pay customs. So now, using the foreign trade zone, you file one entry per week. So 52 entries per year, and anything that that would have gone into the commerce of the United States during that week is put on that customs entry. So assuming that also meets that cap of $634, you would only be paying $33,000 a year rather than $165,000 a year. So it's $132,000 savings. And all you did was reduce the amount of work that you do, your broker does, and that customs does. So that's weekly entry in a nutshell. So for fast moving product that's coming through and going back out almost instantaneous, there's a very high value in weekly entry. Most of the time, there's some level of weekly entry benefit for a company. It's not often, unless it's the big box distributors, it's not often that it's the full amount or amount is high, but there's usually some benefit for all companies using that. Direct delivery, I talked really about that because I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, so we don't really need to go through much more of that. The process is you tell customs at least 30 days ahead of time what you're doing, what product you're bringing into the United States. And if it's not a restricted type, if it's the same merchandise over and over and over, and it comes the same method, everything's the same, import after import after import, and the operator is the owner or the purchaser of the goods at the time of importation, then you can use that direct delivery, which allows the product to move quickly from the port of arrival to the foreign trade zone. Why allow foreign trade zones? It's to retain and create new jobs, to encourage company investment in the local community. New development often leads to improvements in infrastructure and increased production increased purchases of local goods and services. All the reasons that an economic development corporation wants to bring new companies into a community or to keep the existing businesses there. On the national scale, it improves the balance of trade between countries. It strengthens the economy through unemployment rates. The number of people employed in zones is I don't have a number off the top of my head, but it's in the millions. Enhanced development retention of technology because the production is done in the United States. So we're not sending our technology out to other countries for them to make the products that we want to consume here. We keep the technology because we do the production here. Those if there's a reason, we did talk a little bit about some of them. So
We're here to help you and evaluate if it makes sense for your company.
That's something actually I didn't have a chance to mention, Aaron. Thank you for reminding me that. Is part of our job as the administrator of the zone is to help you with a cost benefit analysis. So we'll gather some information from you and run some numbers and spit back a report to you telling you whether it looks like there's a reasonable chance for some savings that, you should take another step at least. Or just go ahead because it makes enough sense, or no, sorry, it just doesn't work at this time. And it's gone both ways.